How's it going, everybody? Welcome back to the Phi-Lacrosse-Ophy Podcast. Very excited to have Michael Sowers on the show. Michael, you are one of my favorite players in the world to watch, and it's been fun to get to know you over the last several months. How you doing, man?
Good, Jamie. Appreciate you having me on.
Hell yeah. Fired up to talk some lacrosse. We got to start off with a little Princeton lacrosse, I think. Big game for them this weekend against Penn. Well, let's talk a little bit about Princeton. And what do you like about how they're playing? I really enjoy watching what Coach Mitchell does out there. What are you seeing out of them over the last number of years since you had your epic shortened season of 2020? But how have you seen that program kind of progress with the way that they play offense? And what do you like?
Yeah, I think, you bring up Coach Mitch. I think Coach Mitch, since I've gotten to know him, I've always felt like he's been on the cutting edge of modern day lacrosse offense. And it really, when he came in my senior year at Princeton, opened my eyes. I mean, I remember fighting him on stuff as simple as I'd never played above the cage before. And it was almost like one of those trust me. And I remember thinking in the fall, like I'm an ex-attackman. I've always been an ex-attackman. Why would I move above the cage? But then all of a sudden you get put in all these different spots, and, defenses have to game plan for so many different things. And I think I just saw it firsthand that year where, we're pushing the pace in transition. Teams have to defend that. We're setting picks all over the field. Teams have to defend that. Then we're sprinkling in a little bit of a motion offense. They have to talk about that. So the list goes on. And like, when you look at it, a team only has so much time and mental capacity to game plan. And I think that, we just like overwhelm teams. And I know, that we were only 5 games into the season. But I was pretty confident we were going to make some noise.
For sure. I love the way they play too, because as much as it's so hard to game plan for, it's so unscripted. I mean, there's clearly some looks that you can see that they're doing, but so much of it is just teaching guys how to play rather than just teaching them to play. What are some of the things that you notice about the way they play and especially the way they move the ball?
Yeah. No, I think you hit the nail on the head. I think that was where I was going with the next is, what's so fun to watch now is there is no script, to your point. And I think that for a defense, that puts so much pressure on you, because when you're watching film, it's hard to be like, all right, hey, we're going to slide off the pop, and then the two's going to fill from the backside. It's like they're constantly changing shape. And I think, for the lacrosse lovers out there, you watch Princeton, and we've talked about this in the past, but like the amount of times the hot guy will change over the course of a possession, like it forces defenses to communicate. And I think that's unique. I think, the ball movement, as you hit on, the ball just spins, and I think all of a sudden, where it's usually dodge, pass, dodge again, the ball spin 4 times and then you'll get a hard go. And then the ball will spin once and you'll get a look inside. So I think that there is just such an unpredictable nature to the whole thing. And then on top of that, just moving guys around at different spots. The 3 pulling 3 behind the cage and then kicking the ball up top, and now all of a sudden you got a 3-on-3. Just innovative stuff that I feel like you didn't necessarily see six years ago.
Yeah, totally agree. That ball movement creates such great spacing too. I think it's one of the underrated sort of pieces about passing. When you talk about spacing and giving space to dodges or keeping the middle open, it's kind of the obvious part about spacing. But when you move the ball and you go pass, it means approach out of those defenders that have to go play it. And that's one of the biggest keys to creating spacing is to get that ball moving. And teams that start getting that ball cooking between dodges, man, is it fun to watch.
Yeah. And I think I agree completely. And I think the other thing that's cool to see that's also a little bit more of a modern concept in lacrosse, you're more of the historian than I am, so maybe I'm dated here, but is the concept of like picking the picker and some of their unique pick concepts.
Yeah.
All of a sudden, you have Coulter on the left side, Kabiri on the right side. You have guys going out to set a pick that are completely free. There's no dog, there's no help. Those guys can shoot anytime they're inside 15. They're almost running free. And then you
Mhm.
rewind the tape and you're like, well, how did the picker get so open? And it's like, well, there was an off-ball screen,
Yeah.
for the picker. And I know in hoops, it's more of a screen the screener terminology.
Yeah.
Um,
Well, the funny
but
thing is, like, when I took the job at Yale in 1991 and I was handed the playbook by Coach Waldwogel in January, I got hired in January. The main out of bounds play was a pick the picker look with a little triangle in front of the crease. Dodge
Mhm.
one side, pick for the ball that side, pick for off ball for that side, roll back, pick for the picker. It worked great until it got scouted. But when you can do this kind of stuff without a scout, then it gets pretty special. And I want to get into talking some two-man game in more depth in a minute. Well, let's talk college lacrosse a little bit more. Who are some of the other offenses or players that you're enjoying watching right
um, obviously, I mean, my two squads, Princeton and Duke. I think that they're two very different teams. Duke is more of your traditional motion offense, but I think that that presents challenges for defenses to cover as well. And obviously, love watching a lot of those guys. Um, Brennan obviously is next level, and I think Zawada's been a great ad for them
now?
offensively. I think he's added another dimension. And some of their younger middies, and then I think McAdory is just electrifying every time he's on the field. So I think they're fun to watch. I mean, pains me to say it a little bit, but I think Notre Dame's a lot of fun to watch.
Yeah.
I
They've
think that,
really kind of, in the last 2 or 3 years, to me, they've become one of my favorite offenses to watch. I just feel like their unpredictability, their passing, their slickness, so different than it was even 5 or 6 years ago when they just didn't have that sort of slick offense to go along with the athleticism. Man, are they good at the two-man and the passing and the balance and the shot selection. It's amazing.
yeah, and I agree completely because I think that, you look at that roster, particularly the midfield, and you wouldn't expect an offense to work with that lineup. It's more of like your bigger super athlete downhill Dodgers, and they're able to do that. And I think, they just moving Pat Cavanaugh all around the field. All
Yeah.
of a sudden you have to defend a two-man game behind. He's up in the top right corner. He's up in the top left corner. Like they're moving Taylor around inside. I think that that's another one that like there's no script, so it's hard to game plan for.
I think my favorite offense to watch is Colgate, though. In all seriousness, if you haven't watched Colgate, watch that motion offense. It's pretty awesome.
I'm a
Oh,
gay fan now.
what's that?
I said I'm
Yeah.
a gay fan now.
Oh yeah. All right, let's turn the page and talk a little Waterdogs. Big big changes in Waterdog land. I'm sure you're sorry to see Coach Copeland go, as much as you're excited to see Coach Tierney and his staff come in. Before we talk about the future, just give us a quick recap on what it was like to play for Coach Cope.
I mean, Cope was the best. I always tell people that I think he was the ideal coach to play for and to kind of learn under as a young player in the league because he was so relatable. And I think that he did a great job of giving it to you straight. But in the same sense, like he understood people. And I think that that's like one of the best compliments I could give a coach, particularly in a league where, you only see each other twice a week during the summer. So, I think that he did a great job kind of building relationships and building a culture, which for the same reason of seeing each other twice a week is not easy to do at all at the professional level. But, I think it speaks to one, starts with Cope, and then two, the people that he brought into the locker room and the fact that we were able to actually establish a true culture. And I think that, I know a lot of people talk about culture, but like it showed. I mean, we were winning, we were successful, and there's a lot of talent, a lot of talented teams in that league that just haven't put it together. And I think the difference is, we might not be the most talented team, although I think that we're up there, but we have a great locker room. And, I think that starts with Cope, and it's really a credit to him.
Yeah, for sure. And it's pretty exciting to get Bill Tierney. I mean, obviously Bill Tierney is regarded as the best, if not the best coach in the history of college lacrosse. And one of the things I would say about Coach T is that he has been so unbelievably adaptive. He pioneered a way of playing that won him a lot of championships, particularly when Princeton wasn't quite as talented as they ended up being in the 96, 97, 98 runs, where they were the best team. But the way he coached defense and the way he controlled the ball and had that recipe and that formula. But then when he left to go to Denver, they played completely differently and won another championship. And that's why I think that you can look forward to him as a head coach in pro lacrosse. He's not a one size fits all type of a guy. And that's really what it's all about.
For sure. And I think for that reason, I mean, we saw that firsthand in the process, and I think before getting into that, like, obviously it's super cool for me, being a Princeton guy. Those Tierney teams were like legendary. And for my entire time at Princeton, it was constantly, getting back to that standard, and I remember, having some of those older games on when we were just hanging out and just watching it. And the buzz around Princeton lacrosse during that time, that was something that, we were trying to bring back. So just had like so much respect for him. And then I think that, getting to know him through the process, the thing that stuck out to me the most was, one, his humility. I think that he, even during the interview process, never once really gave us his resume, even though it speaks for itself. I think he asked more questions than we did. And I think that speaks to your point about him being an innovator and being, able to adapt to things. It was clear. I mean, he was trying to learn the professional game on those calls, and I'm sure he knows more about the professional game than we do, but I think he was just trying to get our opinion and, just get our thoughts around the game. And I think that was super impressive to see.
Totally. And it's pretty awesome to get Dylan Sheridan as the offensive coordinator too. I've known Dylan for a while, got to know him really gotten to know him a lot better over the last several years. Great guy, great coach, head coach at Western Reserve Academy, former head coach at Cleveland State, offensive coordinator at Ohio State, coach, assistant at Princeton, assistant at Denver. And he has really evolved too into playing much more of a principles-based style of play. And Western Reserve has like a top 10 team going on right now. I think he's going to be a fun guy to play for.
For sure. And I know his WRA boys. I know he's got those guys rolling, and he's built a program out there. But I've always heard great things about Coach Sheridan. He was at Princeton, I think, when I was a sophomore in high school. Guys always spoke so highly of him, the guys that played for him. And I think, to your point, I think that the principles-based model applies more to the professional game than any other offensive concept. I think that, for that reason, he's going to be awesome. And it's something, I mean, we've talked a little bit about it, but it's something that I think can really put a lot of pressure on a defense at the professional level.
What does principles-based offense mean to you? What is your vision of that?
Well, I think that's the cool part about principles-based offense. Like, I think that it's up to the group and the individual coach to define what the principles are. To me, principles can be as simple as shot selection, and I think that you look at the professional game, and rarely are you turning it over because of careless turnovers. A lot of the lost possessions are due to bad shots.
Yeah,
sure. And I think developing a principle around judging shot selection and grading shot selection, that's the first one that's top of mind, and then I think you build it out from there. And I think certainly a heavy emphasis on certain off-ball concepts Particularly like your terminology, AAA picks.
Yep.
Like you look at what that can do. At the end of the day, like a lot of short stick D mids in that league are tougher to go against than some of the poles. So I
Yeah.
think the ability to detach yourself from them, come out, set a great pick, all of a sudden now as a feeder, you have your hands free, you're able to survey the field with some sort of off ball concept. I think that, you know, that's huge. And like, that's as good as an assist or a goal in that league. I always say Connor
Right.
Kelly was one of the best pick setters, but he's like the best one of the best AAA guys.
Yeah. Yeah. So principles, shot selection, your AAA ratings with your two-man games, on and off ball, and the ball movement, the spacing. And then
Yeah.
you just kind of dial it up or dial it down based on, personnel and who it is. Everyone's a little bit different. And that's kind of the great thing about it too, is that, again, the sport is not one size fits all either, and nor is an offense, and nor is how any one player plays it. Which, by the way, I think would be a really cool topic for us on the topic of water dogs and how everybody's a little different. So I'd like you to talk a little bit about some of your teammates on the offensive side, and talk a little bit about like their game and maybe what you admire about what they do, and maybe what you've learned from them. So why don't you start off with Zach Currier?
Good one to start with. I mean, how much time do you have?
Keep it to like a minute or two on each. I'll give you a little bit.
I mean, with Zach, I've been around him for a long time, since 2017 when we were on Princeton's campus. And my first reaction to Zach's game was like, what can't this guy do? And I think that I almost take for granted now, and I joke with him, like I almost take for granted playing with him because the first thing that jumps to my head is, I mean, he's an unbelievable ground ball guy, the best ground ball guy I've ever been around. He comes out with ground balls that he has no business winning. And I think for that reason, when you play with him for so long, and there's a scrum of 6 guys and he doesn't come out with it, you're almost like what the hell, Zach? Like what's going on today?
How cool is it that you could be like that good of a player and have that be the attribute that you pick first?
It's unbelievable. Exactly.
It is effort and toughness and all that, but it's like an unbelievable sense and skill level that allows him to do that, to go along with athleticism and toughness.
For sure. And I think he's one of the unique blends of athleticism, toughness, and skill set. Like the fact that he's able to play defensive midfield for Team Canada and then come and play man up for the Waterdogs, and be on our first line midfield. Like, I don't know if there's ever been another guy that can do that in the recent years, at least. So I think he's just super unique. And I think the ground ball side I've always admired with him. Obviously, there's little micro skills of his game that we've talked about, the pump fakes, how he gets guys to bite, some of the deception within his game. When you really break it down and him, like there's a lot to take away, more than just the highlight ground ball plays and goals that he comes away with.
All right, another lefty, McCardle.
Yeah, I mean, skill set aside, I think, Kier's like the ultimate leader at the professional level. And I think that my takeaway from him has always been, he's always there in the big time moments and his temperature never seems to change. I think that his kind of mantra is something that like bleeds throughout our whole team. Like when you see these crazy Waterdogs comebacks and, we come back from in the Atlas game out in Columbus after being down like 10-3 at halftime, we win 19-18. Like it starts with guys like that, that like just keep throwing punches. But I think in terms of skill set, like what I've learned from him is, well, what I admire, I don't know if I fully learned it yet, but the concept of like playing at a slower pace, particularly with short sticks. I think one thing that's unique at the pro level is college, the minute you get a short stick, everybody freaks out. Like they're sliding before you even start going, somebody's going to be open. professional defenses, because of the guy that's on ball and because of the level of IQ off ball, like they change up the looks. Sometimes you might get a slide right away. Sometimes you might get half a slide. Sometimes there might be a 1 and a 2. Sometimes there might be no 2. So you really have to read the game. And I think Cure, playing at his own pace, does a better job than anybody of that. And he consistently just finds the open guy. And I think for me, one thing I've seen is I've struggled playing at such a fast pace because you have to make a decision so fast.
Right.
But his ability to kind of slow the game down and control the tempo on ball while he has a short stick is something that I always thought was super impressive.
Yeah. We've done a lot of Zooms and watched a lot of McCardle clips on the way he does that. He makes it look so easy and effortless, and he's just so aware. He's so aware of like how people are playing him or how they're playing a pick. He's so smooth too, man. His shooting stroke is as smooth as it gets.
It is, and I think there's a little bit of deception too with his stroke.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, he'll say it like goalies, specifically certain goalies, have a tough time reading his shot. His low to high release, like it freezes them for a second,
yeah.
And the next thing you know, it's off.
Currier gets that one too.
Yep.
How about another lefty, Ethan Walker? It's pretty sick. There's 3 lefties there. They're three pretty solid lefties.
I know. I mean, Ewok is kind of like the unsung hero for our offense. And anybody that knows our team would say the same thing. He does everything for us, not in the sense of like Zach does, but more so in the sense that you need him to play without the ball. He can play without the ball. You need him to be a great pick setter. He can be a great pick setter. You need him to dodge a third pole or beat a short stick. He can do that. Capitalize in transition, finish the ball. He can do that. Move off ball. He can do that. Move the ball. Like he knows when to swing the ball. That comes at a premium in the professional league. He's not going to catch it, hold for a second, and then kick it. If he needs to, the ball is going to be zipping. So I think that he just does everything within the flow of our offense. And like I said, that comes at a premium in the professional league where you have so many guys that are used to playing with the ball in their stick.
Totally. He's way more athletic, I think, than people realize. I mean, he's got burst. I mean, he's a tough kid. He's strong. I was always a huge fan of him. I remember watching him play box lacrosse for Peterborough back when he was like playing midget lacrosse against Colin back in the day. I got a chance to watch a lot of those guys in Ontario. Connor Kelly.
CK, I think that I think with CK, I mean, one, obviously everybody talks about him being a shooter. I think he's probably one of, if not the best midfield shooters in the world. In that game, to have the ability to stretch a defense 2 yards beyond the line, and like 2-pointers just change the game so much, the momentum, the flow. All of a sudden you have a guy that can stretch a defense like that. It changes everything. But I think with CK, the thing that's super impressive is his IQ. I mean, we talked about out in Salt Lake City when we played the Archers, the game-winning play was drawn up by CK. And I think that him playing box too, he's developed a little bit of, the inside skill set. But I think CK is another one that there's so many like micro skills to his game that unless you're a lacrosse junkie, you don't really appreciate. One being his pick setting ability. I remember hearing from the Chaos guys week 1, like he got the pole in that game because he was the best pick setter, and like we had the best chemistry. I know I can go one way, change direction again, and he's going to know how to set the pick. He's so good at showing one side. Next thing you know, he flips his hips to the other. The D mid's caught on the other side, and now I'm running free or Kieran's running free. So I think that stuff flies under the radar, but he's another one that, just like the shooting speaks for itself, but just an underrated skill set.
And he's such a smart and deceptive dodger too, the way he uses hezzies and bounce outs and rollbacks. He kind of plays like an attackman in midfield, honestly.
He does, and he would love when I was on my pitch count back in 2022, and he got to play a little bit of attack. Uh, he loved that. But I think that yeah, like his like fake rollback that he does coming down the right, that lefty alley, like that gets guys every single time. That's how he scored the game winner in Albany in 23 this past year.
Yeah, I've really been a huge fan of watching his game ever since his Maryland days. All right, Ryan Conrad.
Conrad is another guy. I mean, I think that he's kind of like our spark plug offensively. I think that he's a super athlete, and he's just a tough cover. And I think that one thing, obviously, what jumps off the page is what he can do with the ball in his stick. And like he's going to draw a slide almost every time. But to me, what's super impressive about Conrad is his cutting ability. Like he dodges so hard, but he cuts even harder. And I think if you watch him, like the concept of grabbing sticks or slapping sticks away and then cutting hard, like he'll do that and guys can't run with him. He'll cut for 15 yards, or he'll get to the 5 yard above GLE mark and like flash real quick. And he's so like springy that guys just can't stay with him off ball. And for me, he's been one of my favorite off ball targets. And when you think of Ryan Conrad, you don't think about him as an off ball guy. But I think that he's somebody that can kind of do everything.
He must be incredibly athletic because he like literally just keeps getting better.
Yeah.
I mean, I remember seeing him for the first time when he was a freshman in high school. We had that 3D blue chip. And I saw him down there, and I called Dom. I was like, this kid's unbelievable. It was back in the early recruiting days. He was like the first went in that class. And then he gets to college, he just keeps getting better. And then he wins a national championship and just made like the most incredible plays in that Final Four ever. And then he goes to the pros and makes Team USA and just keeps getting better. And he's just so smart, so athletic. It's really cool. It's cool to watch him play.
I think with Conrad too, like he's just a lacrosse player.
Yeah.
If you need him to set picks, he can do that. If you need him to be on the wing of a face-off, he can do that. You need him to take a face-off, he can do that. Play D-midi, he can do that. So, yeah, he's just a player.
For sure. All right, let's switch gears here. Let's talk a little bit about training. So, Michael, that's kind of how we met. Was that you reached out on a text? Hey, Coach Mitch gave me your number. I'm really trying to figure out how to improve my training. And so we started working together. We started doing Zoom calls, coming up with training ideas, shared with you a lot of the concepts that I'm working on with the jam for athletes that I work on. Do you mind sharing a little bit about what your training regimen looks like now, how it's changed, and what you're trying to work on these days?
Yeah, I guess, well, I'll start. I'll go back to that text. I'd obviously followed you really since Coach Mitch came into Princeton and having access to your JM3 platform. And I've always felt like you kind of taught a skill set that, one, I didn't have, but two, not many people can teach it. And I think that me just loving the game and constantly wanting to evolve my own game, particularly with my recent injury history, I felt like us working together, I was going to be able to learn that skill set. And at the time, I didn't really know like how to define it. I know it was more of like a indoor style, a little bit of like, slickness, but I think that the skill set is like a skill set of deception in every part of the game. And I think that I've always been able to kind of out athlete people and then make a decision from there based off of my IQ. But just the reality of the pro game, I feel like I haven't been where I want to be because I'm missing that piece of deception. So I think that, that was the main motivation reaching out. And I think, we've been able to tackle a lot of, the stuff that I've been wanting to work on.
Yeah, totally. It's been a blast too. And it's also interesting, the way that you train, which is basically play a lot of pickup. Can you talk a little bit about that? What that means, so people know what we're talking about when we say that, and why it's been not only fun, but how it's sort of helped you.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, The pickup that Jamie's referring to is literally 4x or 3x. For people who don't know what that is, it's essentially a 4-on-4 lacrosse on a little bit of a smaller net than a box goal. What's it, 3.5 by 3.5?
Yep.
3.5 by 3.5. And each team is putting one guy in goal when they're on defense. So naturally, it turns into a 4v3 or a 3v2. You turn the ball over, offense goes to defense. That offense is now on defense, so there's one guy in goal. So playing with whoever I can find, local high school kids, skilled 8th graders, guys that are 40 years old that just love the game. Really just however we can put together numbers. We've essentially been playing once, twice a week since late October,
Yeah.
which is crazy. And I think for me, it's a little bit counterintuitive to how I've always thought about training. I've always been a reps guy. I'm going to do 500 reps off the wall each day. And I think that, that was great to a certain point. But, when I think about the skill set that I was trying to learn, and to give an example of deception, being able to feed from different angles. I could do that a million times off the wall. But at the end of the day, in a game, you have to learn how to bend it around guys, around sticks, how to fit it in the tight windows, how to look people off, how to read the flow of the game. And you can't replicate that on air or on the wall. So, my behind the back, for example, I could throw and catch the ball behind the back, no problem. Without even looking at the ball, I can put the ball in a little can, thrown behind my back off the wall. But when it comes to the game, I've never been able to put it together because I just don't feel comfortable doing it in that setting. And I think that now doing it in a 4x setting or a 3x setting, you're replicating that real-time decision-making and learning how to do it within the flow of an offensive possession. And, I don't think that you get that doing it on air. I certainly did it. I mean, I repped it a million times for 10 years, and I still haven't thrown it behind the back pass in a game.
You will this year.
I will be throwing some, yeah.
There's no doubt. And because I want to do it 25 times and at the right times, and I think that's just it. I kind of came to this conclusion of experimenting with this model in 2017. I'd sold 3D and I stepped down as the head coach of Colin's team. And I was proud of the work we'd done, but I wasn't satisfied at all with the transfer of what I knew kids could do, what I knew they knew how to do, and with what they did. I was very organized with how I taught everything. I taught every single skill. And I might show it on air, but then I would teach it in live reps. But it was still a little bit too structured. And what I started to experiment with was, why is it that people just why won't they use the skills that they have? It's kind of like when you talk about people only use 15% of their brain. I felt like that was about the percentage of what people use of their skill set, particularly with deception. They just projected what they were doing all the time. So I went into a totally different direction. I was like, all right, I'm going to start seeing if I can just if kids could do it in pickup on their own, would they do it in a game? And sure enough, it started to happen. Chad Palumbo is a great example of that. That kid, sophomore year in high school, he was good. He was a good lefty, but he wasn't sort of off the charts. And man, he started playing a ton of pickup, and all of a sudden, within a year, he was off the charts. And he's one of our probably mutually favorite players to watch. But as I learned more and more and more, I started to learn about ecological dynamics and the constraints-led approach. And that's something that I've tried to teach you a little bit about. What are your thoughts about those concepts of the constraints-led approach, and how are you using that in your training?
Well, I've become super interested in constraints-led approach ever since you kind of put me onto it. And I do think that it's kind of the future of skill development in all sports. I really do. And I think that I gave the example of, me being a reps guy. I think that, that only gets you so far. And, this all season particularly, and, my own training, everything that I've done has been in some sort of contextualized environment. Whether it's shooting, having a goalie in there, different constraints while I'm shooting, playing, different forms of 1v1, but for me, dodging on air, like you're only getting so much of that. And I'll give you a prime example. Like I've always struggled with question marks. I'm somebody that I've done a million question mark reps in my life. But when it gets to the game, like, and you have to feel somebody's weight on you and they're putting pressure into you and their sticks off field or they're V holding you, like it just doesn't feel right. It's almost like
It's like
this isn't
Kavanaugh. You're like, how did he do that?
exactly.
You know what I mean?
Exactly.
Like, or Sam here or whatever. Some of these guys that are like up the hatch to turn around. It's like, but you can't practice that on air. Really, that's something that you have to get a feel for when to do it, because it's not the execution of the skill that's the hard part. It's kind of how to set it up.
And I think the other thing is that a lot of times what you get through repping stuff on air is like you get this like predetermined move in your mind.
Yeah.
And that translates to the game where it's like, hey, I'm going to go split right, and then I'm going to go to my left, and then I'm going to roll back, and then I'm going to go up the hash, and I'm going to question mark. Because that's what I repped out a million times on air.
Right.
Where like the CLA, you're reacting to what's in front of you. And I think question marks is a great example because, a guy might be riding up your back. The question mark isn't the move.
Right.
Like maybe it's a rocker, or like maybe it's kind of like right on right, where you're kind of windshield wiping his stick off of you and you're turning the corner. But
Right.
if you practiced locking in your move in your mind, like that's going to be hard to move away from when the game comes. So
For sure.
I think being a purely reactionary player is something that all the great players, that's what they are. They react to what's in front of them.
That's
And
right.
I think that you
That's
get
what-
that in the CLF.
That's what ecological dynamics is all about. You perceive and you act instantaneously and you self-organize. So the first key is got to be in a contextualized situation with ideally with teammates and opponents, at the very least an opponent. But one of the things that I've learned a ton about, I mean, everybody kind of knows that playing on air is not going to be as representative of the game as playing against somebody. But one of the really interesting things about the CLA that you and I talk about a lot, that I've learned a ton about, and I think you are continuing to learn about, is the variability. Number one, changing constraints and changing what you're doing as opposed to doing things the same way, which we've talked about being a creature of habit. I'm that way, you're that way. It's like when you like something, it's hard not to go back to it. And then the second part is being intentional with constraints, so that if you want to learn how to do, I mean, a perfect example is last week we talked about one-on-ones to learn how to do all the really hinges up the hash. And we talked about how to set that up. Would you mind talking a little bit about variability and how you've been trying to use that? So it's not just 3x and 4x, right? It's like endless different, all even, uneven games, adding feeders, adding pickers, as well as how do you view changing constraints or being intentional about your constraints so you can learn something new?
For sure. Well, I think, to take a step back, like for the listeners, essentially how my training is structured is 1 day of pickup and then 2 days of the variability that you're talking about, where essentially you have guys out there and you're kind of doing different things. The one-on-ones being an example, but I think you hit the nail on the head. Like one thing that I certainly am a creature of habit, particularly if it's fun. But the reality is like you then fall into like the same looks and the same repetition and the same habits every single time. And you even get that a little bit with 3x and 4x, which is why it's important to change up, your roles and your constraints. Exactly. But like one-on-ones, for example, like, if I didn't vary them, I would try and do a finalizer every single time, and the reality is like, you might have that once a game. So I think that, the ability to just kind of like change up the looks to work on certain skills. Like an example would be, like trailing one-on-ones from the top left corner where, you're working on one punch moves, or just getting a step subtly and then on the run hitching and trying to draw a check, trying to draw him to overcommit. And then all of a sudden I can change direction off of that, and I think that working on something like that where, you're getting a step. So defenses are going to be hesitant. Do I slide? Do I not slide? And then almost controlling the guy that's covering you by knowing, all right, I'm going to be able to get him to draw a check here, and then I can change direction off of that. I'm going to get my hands free and there's going to be no slide. And you get that through the contextualized environments like you were talking about.
Right. And all those different starts.
Yeah.
Whether it's a jab start or a post-up start or a bait start or a one-on-one plus a picker start, there's so many different ways to do it. What I'm really trying to do as a coach and what I've been excited to do to try to help you is like figure out the things that you want to learn how to do. And then let's try to figure out the look that'll sort of encourage you to do it or maybe force you to do it. And then back to the pickup games. I mean, changing your games and changing the constraints and changing the scoring systems is so much more fun because if you just play the same game all the time, I mean, 4x is always fun, but if you play 4x where you have to play the ball behind the net, and all of a sudden it opens it up and the defense has to play certain ways, whether it's defensive coverages or offensive actions or a scoring system, there's just so many creative ways. You can look at anything from a principles of play perspective, which are kind of like the principles of offense we talked about. You can have those as well as the individual skills that you might want someone to learn. It's also kind of interesting too, like how we're not trying to like learn a specific move, but more of like a concept. When you say that's true, I mean, there's like, because there's not one way to do it, right? So we talk so much about deception. We talk so much about how to draw checks, and we'll look at videos of how a lot of other guys do it. Maybe we'll look at how Ryder Garnsey draws a check, or how Jeff Teat looks something off, or whatever. But then it comes down to the athlete trying to figure out how to do these things on their own. So yeah, the CLA it is the money ball of modern day skill acquisition, no doubt.
Yeah, I completely agree, and I think that I would just go back to like I was saying, like the ability to be like purely reactionary, the concept. And I think that that's what a lot of, kids struggle with is, they're programmed in their head, I'm going to do this, where I think the CLA, I mean, to your point, that's literally exactly what it is. Like you're reacting to your environment and to be able to process the game, and make decisions in real time. You just don't get that going through normal drills. And I think that I certainly didn't. I mean, one thing that I felt like I was lacking in past off seasons was, making decisions. Like you don't play lacrosse from September to May. So the ability to create some sort of practice environment where you're being forced to make decisions, I think it's huge.
Hey, rattle off some of the skills you've added that you always could have done, but you really didn't do that you wanted to learn. If you can I could probably rattle off a few, you can rattle off a few, but just from these pickup game environments or whether it be out of the live stuff that you're doing, what are some of the things that you wanted to learn that we've been able to put you into situations where you have learned? Kind of like, being able to feed behind the back, right?
For sure. Well, I think that that's a simple one to start with, but then I think, in some of your terminology, like punch moves would be one. Being able to draw a check coming up the hash, which frees up my hands. On the run hitches, changing direction off of those. Powerless pump, being able to freeze the whole defense with a big shot fake and then feed off of that. The ability to feed from different angles, be it overhand, 3/4 or underhand, or even twister passes, or curveballs, like showing you're throwing to one pipe and then twisting it back to the other. The concept of, being deceptive with your shooting, raising your shoulders, keeping it low, or kind of showing like a golf swing and then the ball's coming high, or low to low where you're kind of lifting your shoulders up and freezing the goalie high. I think the list goes on and on.
It goes.
Uh,
Screen
'cause
passes.
yeah,
Screen
because it's
pass.
really right. It's really just about deception. And I mean, it's
Yeah.
kind of like there's endless ways to be deceptive. It's kind of just putting a framework around it and defining, some of those things that really like helps you understand it.
Michael, I think one of your strongest attributes is your ability to be intentional. And now that you've got the CLA, because you were always very intentional about everything you wanted to work on, and regimented is in the sense of how hard you were going to work, you had a plan, you executed. Now you've got this same sort of ability to be intentional, but you're in so many different situations, and you've got the ability to be intentional in that situation to experiment with different solutions. And I feel like your game is just getting so much more variable.
It definitely is. And I think that was the whole goal of this offseason. Like the minute that right after the championship game, like I knew I had to change things up in this offseason. And, I knew that I was definitely, happy with where I was as a player, but I knew that there was, more that I can add to my game. And there's like a whole nother level for me. And I think, just as we kind of started the conversation, that was adding the skill set of deception, which I just didn't feel like I had and you need at the professional level. So, I was super intentional to your point about, and I'm somebody that like, if I'm going to do something, I'm going to dive fully in. So it's been a cool journey, cool start, but I know it's kind of just the beginning for me.
For sure. You know what else too that's been kind of fun is just to dive deep into two-man game. I mean, for a long time you've been running off picks in big little situations, but I feel like through the all-even pickup games in particular, or the one-on-one plus the picker stuff, the off-ball. I mean, I feel like looking at you in sixes, there was a lot of fun stuff that you did with the ball. But honestly, some of the off-ball things you were doing with your picking, your sealing, your slipping, your communication was a huge evolution. You want to talk a little bit about how you think that's going to transpose into outdoor?
For sure, I think well, for one, I've never put an emphasis or a premium on off-ball. I think that when I was at Duke, it's definitely a skill set that was more emphasized by the coaching staff, and I think I learned it down there, and I think they did a great job really teaching it to me. And Princeton, like I had a little bit of off ball, and Coach March originally was great about putting me in certain spots, but I think that I've always kind of been a ball dominant attackman.
Well, and you've been an X guy. And like as an X guy, what do you do off ball besides, hang your guy up and sneak, right? It's really interesting, on that topic. It's just that so many people are like, I'm an X guy, but it holds you back so much if you're always just behind the net because you don't learn how to do all these incredibly important things on the wings and in front of the net.
For sure. And I think that, just having an all season to like really dive into this stuff completely. And I think that's the beauty of the professional all season that, a lot of guys don't have the luxury. Is like, I can do whatever I want, whenever I want. So if I want to work on purely off ball concepts for 2 weeks, I can do that, and I think that for me, I look at the off ball side as, just adding another layer to my game. A lot of the defenders at the professional level, just like attackmen, they are ball dominant defensemen. They cover the ball. That's what they do. And I think that the last thing some of these guys want to do is talk through off ball picks and be put in tough situations off ball because they want to maintain their matchup. So if I can set a seal off ball for Connor Kelly and all of a sudden my guy doesn't want to leave me to get out to cover him, like that's something that's going to get us a look. So I think that, like I said, just adding a layer to my game that I know is going to put some of these defensemen in an uncomfortable position.
Yeah. It's been a lot of fun, man. Can't wait to keep it going. It was pretty fun when you came down to Delray. How fun was it to watch all those kids that had done all that stuff and to be able to play with them? It was pretty sick, wasn't it?
It is cool. I mean, in a way, I feel like, I'm like a high school kid kind of learning some of this stuff. I remember being down there and like learning from some of the high school kids, which I think is super cool. And Delray was just a blast because you're just playing lacrosse.
That's
It's
it.
like a lacrosse camp that's purely focused on, skills and micro skills and getting better. And you get that vibe from everybody where you're obviously competing, but every single person down there was down there to get better, which I think
Yeah.
was super cool.
Michael, thank you so much for coming on the podcast, man. It's been a blast working with you. Looking forward to continuing it. And we have a lot of epic lacrosse conversations, usually recorded, but this is the only one that's going to go public. So thanks again for coming on, man.
Yeah, appreciate it, Jamie. Been a lot of fun.